What are some solved mysteries? The case of Adrienne Shelley, screenwriter for Waitress. Husband came home to find her hanging in the shower, ruled suicide. He insists she was happy and would never kill herself, promoting another view of crime scene where they found a shoe print that matched a construction worker in the building. Sure enough, the construction worker went to rob her and thought he killed her, so staged a suicide. When the hanging ended up being the actual thing that killed her. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/Adrienne Shelley. The Siberian craters. As the permafrost melts, the methane gas gets released and it sometimes ignites. The bloop. TL. Doctor, in 1997 a really weird and loud noise was detected underwater and everyone was all, WTF was that? Quote. In 2012 it was determined it was an iceberg breaking and or rubbing against the seabed. The Erebus and the Terror were found a few years ago. The two ships were part of an Arctic expedition and disappeared 150 years ago. https en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Franklin%27s, Lost Expedition. While it doesn't give us who the Zodiac Killer is, just recently his most infamous 340 cipher was solved after 51 years. The Sailing Stones of Death Valley. https www.nationalparks.org/connect/blog/sailing-stones-death-valley. Video here. https u2.be/89-ifidpm. TL. Dr. Rocks would magically move up to 1,500 feet in the desert. Turns out it gets cold and freezes the ground overnight and the rocks would get pushed by the ice sheets that melted under the wind. What Dinosaurus looked like. When I was a kid in the 80s, all that was known were the bones of the arms with enormous claws. Hence its name. Terrible Hand. They were mostly shown grasping a small car because they were so freaking huge. The rest of the animal was a complete mystery. Was it like a giant Allosaurus? One that'd make the T-Rex look like a puppy in comparison? A few years later it seemed more likely to be ostrich-like and an omnivore. Either way, given how rare it is for fossils to form at all, I was convinced I'd die never knowing what this dinosaur actually looked like. Then surprisingly in 2014, they found more bones and it was just the weirdest thing. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Dinosaurus. The Death of Azaria Chamberlain. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/death-of-Azaria-Chamberlain. She was a 2-month-old girl who disappeared while camping with her parents near Uluru. Prosecutors successfully tried her mother for murder and father as an accessory. During the entire ordeal it was insisted by her mother that Azaria was taken by dingoes, native wild dogs in Australia. This was disregarded. As before this there were no records of dingoes showing any hostility towards humans or causing any attacks or fatalities nearby. Several years later, an unrelated search not far from the campground found a child's coat of the exact brand and description Azaria's mother gave to the police, in an area littered with dingo dens. The parents' conviction was overturned and the case was established that in reality, she had been taken from her parents' tent during the night, killed and eaten by dingoes. El Dorado, or the Lost City of Gold, turned out to be a mistranslation. It was just the name of some guy that got mistranslated to the name of a city. 1947, and British South American Airways aircraft named Stardust disappeared. Its last message was simply, STENDEC. After an exhausting search, no trace of the aircraft was found. For years, conspiracy theories and talk of alien abduction by wackos circulated. Till 1998, when mountain climbers on a remote mountain found an engine, pieces of metal, and clothing at the bottom of a glacier on the side of Mount Tupungato. Turns out the aircraft got caught flying the wrong way in the jet stream while it was flying at night, and using a system of timing when to start their descent. Being in the jet stream reduced their airspeed in relation to the Earth, and they smacked themselves straight into the side of a mountain, after which an avalanche covered the wreckage. The wreckage took decades to flow down the side of the mount with the glaciers. The glacier preserved the wreck so well that 50 years later the recovery team found identifiable remains, personal items, and could read serial numbers on the engines. Amazing, one of the landing gear tires was still inflated, and that teams continued to visit the site for periodically as more of the aircraft, cargo, and remains of passengers are still emerging from the ice. In the 1970s, a number of Japanese citizens disappeared from coastal areas in Japan. After many years it was found out that North Korea had abducted them. North Korean abductions of Japanese citizens. Edit. Megumi Yokota. Most of the missing were in their 20s. The youngest, Megumi Yokota, was 13 when she disappeared in November 1977 from the Japanese west coast city of Niigata. Where is the Titanic? Most people don't realize that half of the people in the world grew up when the ship's location was still a complete mystery. Now, it's old news. The Solway Spaceman. In 1964, Jim Templeton, a fireman from the English city of Carlisle, was spending an afternoon out with his family when he snapped a photograph his young daughter. Without much thought, but when he got home and had the film developed, he noticed what has now become known as the Solway Spaceman. The photo shows what many people say is a person in some form of spacesuit. Kodak even analyzed the photo, and their experts said it was authentic, lending to the spaceman theory. The spaceman was his wife with her back to the camera. He was only able to see 70% of the frame and didn't realize his wife was in the background of the picture. I have one that most people seem to not know about. Grand Duchess Anastasia was in fact killed with the rest of her family in 1918. She never escaped, and the several women throughout the 20th century claiming to be her lied. The site of the execution of the Tsar and his family was completely untouched until 1991. Excavation found only 9 of the 11 expected remains. It wasn't until 2007 that 2 further sets of remains were found a small distance away from the previous grave site. DNA testing found that one of the sets of remains belonged to Tsarevich Alexei and the other to one of his sisters. With this find, it proved conclusively that the entire imperial family was in fact executed and buried in 1918. Forrest Fenn's hidden treasure chest that he buried years ago and left clues to where to find its location. It was found within the last 2 years, I think. Here's a link to an article better explaining it. https www.reddit.com/r/unresolvedmysteries/comments/jimilm6/Forrest Fenn announces treasure has been found/ UTM source equals share and UTM medium equals IOSAP and UTM name equals IOSSMF. In 1981, a Soviet submarine ran aground in Swedish waters. This was a huge deal. although the Soviets claimed the sub was in distress and didn't purposefully enter Swedish waters. Basically everyone in Sweden saw it as evidence that their waters were being invaded by spy subs. Plus, they did some snooping of their own and determined that the sub was emitting radiation, meaning it had nukes on board. So they went along with the Soviets' clearly false claim about an accident and helped get the sub out of there. But panic was in the air. So the Swedes did exactly what you'd expect. And they prepared for more Soviet subs. I mean, when you see one Soviet sub, surely there are more, right? So Sweden developed advanced acoustic technology to detect subs, and they created a plan to basically seal off their waters when they heard a sub. And wouldn't you know it, a year later, they found a Soviet sub. Well, they didn't find it, but they absolutely heard it. And they cut off the bay and figured they just had to hunt the sub down. But after a month, they couldn't find it. They gave up and reopened the bay. But they assumed the sub found a way out. But they'll get it next time. And then it happened again. But they couldn't find it again. And then again and again, with no clear pattern for a decade. What the heck? Thankfully, the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. So, no more subs, right? Yet, because the Russian subs were still coming. Wait, what? Okay, so now nothing is making sense. At this point, the Swedish military brought in outside experts to figure out what was happening. This included oceanographer types who were obvious experts in the surrounding waters. The military then played the audio evidence of the Soviet submarines, only to be told they weren't submarines at all, they were fish. And the propeller-like sound was water being released from their swim bladders. And that's the story of how the Swedish military spent 10 years and tens of millions of dollars chasing fish farts. Human spontaneous combustion, not a real thing. It's where there was an overlooked source of ignition. Then subcutaneous fat is absorbed into clothing and acts like a wick. Basically they're a human candle. Gitas and the Land of Ta. A few years ago, 2017, comedian Nate Fernald posted a tweet of an enamel pin he had bought of a familiar-looking friendly monster with the word Gitas written under it. He was unable to find any information on what Gitas is, and the mystery took the internet by storm. The mystery kept growing as someone found a sticker of Gitas alongside other characters all listed as the Land of Ta. The sticker sheet was from a company called Denison. There were no Google results at all for either Gitas or the Land of Ta. With multiple people researching, that was where the mystery was left off, and people kind of forgot about it. But a couple years later it was solved. A podcast was made where they investigated the mystery. Got a hold of the former art director of Denison back in the 80s, who referred them to a few potential artists, and they found the daughter of one of the artists who had passed away, and in her father's stuff was the original pencil drawings of the creatures of the Land of Ta. It was never anything but those stickers. This internet mystery still appeared on lists for a while as unsolved. The only mystery left is who made the enamel pins, which is still a mystery, but not quite as big as, who is this character in this land that seems familiar but that there's no record of? Quote, "The Golden State Killer, East Area Rapist, Joseph James D'Angelo. A former police officer, who was sacked for burglary and mechanic. American serial rapist, murderer, burglar. Committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes and over 100 burglaries between 1973 to 1986. I was listening to the 6-part podcast called Case File, and they hadn't yet caught the suspect. But a year or so ago they finally got him after collecting DNA evidence when he put a tissue in the bin outside. It was a confirmed match. The Taucidae tribe in the Philippines were an inauthentic Stone Age tribe living in isolation for thousands of years, but probably an authentic indigenous forest tribe living in isolation for 150 years. https www.esquiremag.ph/long-reads/features/taucidae-hoax-AO0293-2020803-LFRM.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.